They were college students, normal, healthy, psychologically stable young men. Each one had been carefully screened by professional researchers, interviewed, tested, evaluated to confirm they had no history of mental illness, no criminal record, no psychological vulnerabilities. They were, by every clinical measure, fine. On a Sunday morning in August 1971, some of them were sitting in their apartments, reading, eating breakfast, living ordinary college student lives. Then there was a knock at the door. Real police officers, real handcuffs, read their rights, pushed into the back of real police cars as neighbors watched from doorways and windows. They were driven to a building on the campus of Stanford University. Stripped, deloused, blindfolded, dressed in identical smocks with no underwear, a chain bolted around one ankle, their names replaced with numbers. They had not committed any crime. They had answered a newspaper advertisement. The study was supposed to run for 2 weeks. Philip Zimbardo, one of the most respected psychologists in America, shut it down after 6 days because the researchers had forgotten one thing. Their subjects were still human beings, and what happened in those 6 days changed the way the world understood evil. Philip Zimbardo was 38 years old in the summer of 1971. He was brilliant, ambitious, and already well known in academic psychology circles. He had grown up poor in New York, earned his way to Yale on scholarship, and built a career at Stanford that made him one of the most cited researchers in his field. He had a theory. Zimbardo believed that situational forces, the environment, the role you are placed in, the uniform you wear, have a more powerful influence on human behavior than character, personality, or personal morality. He believed that ordinary people, given the right circumstances, could become capable of extraordinary cruelty, not because they were bad people, but because the situation made them that way. He wanted to prove it. The Stanford Prison Experiment was funded by the United States Office of Naval Research. The U.S. military wanted to understand the psychology of conflict between prisoners and guards, particularly in military detention settings. Zimbardo got his funding, got his basement, and got his subjects. He placed an advertisement in a local newspaper. He was looking for male college students to participate in a psychological study of prison life. The pay was $15 a day, good money for a student in 1971. 75 men responded. After psychological screening, 24 were selected, all deemed physically and mentally stable, mature, and least involved in antisocial behavior. A coin flip divided them. 12 became guards, 12 became prisoners. Nobody chose their role. Nobody had any relevant experience. Nobody had any particular tendency toward violence or submission. The coin decided, and the coin changed everything. Day 1 passed almost without incident. The guards were not given any formal training. They were issued uniforms, wooden batons, and mirrored sunglasses that prevented anyone from making eye contact with them. They were told their job was to maintain order. They were told not to use physical violence. Everything else was up to them. The prisoners were placed in 3 small cells. Each wore a numbered smock, a chain on their ankle, and a stocking cap over their hair. Their identities had been systematically stripped from them. They were numbers now. To create an oppressive atmosphere as quickly as possible, each prisoner was also made to carry a chain padlocked around one ankle, a constant physical reminder of their captivity, even while sleeping. On the morning of the second day, the prisoners rebelled. They barricaded their cell doors from the inside. They tore off their stocking caps. They taunted the guards. They refused to follow orders. The guards responded. They used a fire extinguisher to spray prisoners with a freezing blast of CO2, forcing them back from the doors. They stripped the prisoners naked. They took their beds away. They put the rebellion's leaders in solitary confinement, a janitor's closet just large enough to stand in. The rebellion lasted hours. The guards won. And something shifted in the basement of that building that nobody fully understood yet. The guards had tasted control, and they wanted more of it. By day 2, the guards had begun using psychological tactics, creating a privilege cell where better-behaved prisoners received better food and amenities, then randomly rotating who was in it so that no prisoner could trust another. They forced prisoners to insult each other. They made them perform degrading exercises. They denied them bathroom access, forcing them to use plastic buckets in their cells. These were college students, all of them, guards and prisoners alike. None of them had been like this before the experiment began. His name was Doug Corpy. He was a psychology student. Slight, quiet, intelligent. He had signed up for the experiment because, as he later admitted, he thought it would be a good chance to study for his graduate school entrance exams. He became prisoner 8,612. Doug Corpy was a ringleader of the prisoner rebellion. He was also the first prisoner to suffer what appeared to be an extreme emotional stress reaction so severe that the researchers released him after just 36 hours. The recordings of that breakdown are some of the most disturbing audio documents in the history of psychology. Corpy was in solitary confinement, the janitor's closet, when he began rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. When guards ordered him to stop, he screamed, "I can't take it anymore," and began pounding on the door. Zimbardo initially dismissed it. "He's trying to trick us," he told the guards. Only when Corpy began hyperventilating did they release him. Here is where this story gets darker. Decades later, Doug Corpy gave a different account. He said that he had actually faked the breakdown. He needed to study for the GRE. When the guards refused to bring him his books, he decided that the only way to leave the experiment was to appear to be losing his mind. The screaming, the rocking, the hyperventilating, he staged it. "Zimbardo thought I was losing it," he said, and Zimbardo was wrong. But here is the thing that stays with you after you hear that. Whether Corpy's breakdown was real or staged, it does not change what happened to everyone else. It does not change what the guards became. It does not change what Zimbardo himself became. Because the most disturbing transformation in that basement was not happening in the cells. It was happening in the man running the study. Zimbardo had designed the experiment. He had written the rules. He had set up the cameras. But somewhere in the first few days, he stopped being the researcher observing the prison and became something else entirely. He became the prison superintendent. Zimbardo later admitted it himself. "I wasn't a psychologist studying behavior anymore. I was the superintendent of a prison where people were suffering. When parents visited on day 4 worried about their sons, shocked by what they saw, Zimbardo had the prisoners cleaned up and fed first. He instructed them to tell their families they were doing fine. When a guard suggested moving the experiment to a real prison after neighbors complained about noise, Zimbardo seriously considered it. He was not watching the experiment descend into cruelty. He was managing it, facilitating it. Recordings from inside the experiment later revealed that Zimbardo and his colleagues had actively encouraged harsh treatment of the prisoners, directly contradicting his later claim that he gave the guards very little direction. By day 5, the guards were forcing prisoners into sexual humiliations. They forced inmates to simulate sodomy as punishment. A sobbing prisoner was taunted for wanting to see a chaplain. Paper bags were placed over prisoners' heads when they were moved through the hallways so they could not see where they were going. This was not an emergent property of the situation. This was a building with cameras, with researchers, with a professor in charge who had forgotten he was supposed to be stopping this. And then she walked in. Christina Maslach was a psychology professor and Zimbardo's girlfriend. She had been invited to come and conduct interviews with participants. When she arrived and saw what was happening, prisoners shuffling in paper bags over their heads, guards taunting a sobbing young man, the entire atmosphere of a real institution of cruelty, she was sick to her stomach. She confronted Zimbardo after they left the site. "It is terrible what you are doing to those boys," she told him. "They had a fight," she later said, "like you wouldn't believe." She was the only person out of everyone who had visited or observed the experiment across 5 days to object. The only one. That night, Zimbardo made his decision. On the morning of day 6, he ended the Stanford Prison Experiment. The young men who had played guards went home. Most of them were devastated by what they had done. Several could not understand how it had happened, how they had gone from being ordinary students to men who had stripped and humiliated and tormented their peers within days. At a fake parole board hearing during the experiment, each prisoner had been asked if they would forfeit all money they had earned if they were released immediately. Most said yes. They said yes, meaning they were willing to work for free just to leave. But then, when the board said they would consider it, most of them went back to their cells and waited. They did not walk out. They waited for permission to leave a study they were legally free to exit at any time. That detail is the most disturbing thing in the entire experiment. Not the guards, not Zimbardo. The prisoners who had been told from the beginning that they could leave had so completely absorbed their role that they forgot they had a choice. The Stanford Prison Experiment became one of the most famous studies in the history of psychology. It has been invoked to explain horrors as wide-ranging as the Holocaust, the My Lai massacre, and the Abu Ghraib prison torture scandal. When photographs emerged in 2004 of U.S. military police at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq torturing, sexually humiliating, and abusing prisoners, Zimbardo saw immediately what had happened. The same psychological forces, the same dehumanization, the same transformation of ordinary people, given uniforms and power, and no meaningful oversight. He testified as an expert witness at the trial of one of the Abu Ghraib guards. He argued the situation had made them what they became. The court did not agree. But here is the part that makes this story uniquely unsettling for our purposes. A recent documentary re-examining the Stanford Prison Experiment found that the behavior of the guards was not spontaneous. Recordings showed Zimbardo and his team actively encouraging harsher treatment. The study has been called in published academic critiques better understood as an improv performance in which subjects acted the way they believed Zimbardo expected, rather than a genuine emergent descent into cruelty. Which means the most cited piece of evidence that ordinary people can become monsters may itself have been partly constructed by a man so desperate to prove his theory that he directed the performance without realizing he was doing it. Philip Zimbardo died in October 2023 at his home in San Francisco. He was 91 years old. He spent his final years defending the experiment against critics. He died still believing he had discovered the truth about human evil. Here is what we actually know. 24 young men entered a basement in August 1971. Within 2 days, half of them were tormenting the other half. Within 6 days, a respected psychologist had forgotten he was a researcher and become the thing he was supposed to be studying. The only person who stopped it was a woman who should not have needed to. Whether the guards were coached or not, something real happened in that basement. The prisoners forgot they could leave. The guards forgot they were students. The researcher forgot he was watching. The experiment illuminates the dark side of human nature which can emerge under the right set of circumstances. That finding holds whether Zimbardo coached his guards or not. Because the real horror of the Stanford Prison Experiment is not that people become cruel when given power. The real horror is simpler. The real horror is that it only took 2 days. 2 days to turn students into oppressors. 2 days to turn a psychologist into a prison superintendent. 2 days to make young men forget their own names and answer only to numbers. If that can happen in a university basement with cameras, with researchers, with a clear legal right to leave at any moment, what does it tell us about every real institution of power that has ever existed? About every real prison, every real military, every real government program? The Stanford Prison Experiment has been debated, criticized, and partially discredited for 50 years. But the debate itself proves the point. We are still arguing about what it means. Because whatever really happened in that basement, we recognized it. We recognized it because we have seen it before, and we will see it again. This has been Hollow Cure, the history they buried. We dig it up. If the thought of this video stays with you, if something about this story feels uncomfortably close to the world you already live in, subscribe, because we are not done.